Hi, and welcome to another episode of Money Talk, where we don't just talk about money, how to get it, how to grow it, what to do with it, or how to be rich, but what would your life be like if you had all this money in the world and you were not a happy person? You didn't know what to do with it. Well, we all know how to spend it, right? But what if that money didn't bring you happiness? See, true richness comes from living with purpose and fulfillment. And today, our special guest is going to tell us about that and talk to us about why she and her husband have been uh, digital nomads and living the kind of life that they have today. But I have two things that I want to ask you to do. Know, like, and share this, because if this is a message that resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself. And then stay tuned, because we'll be right back.
Linda gave me the courage, the confidence to move forward.
And after I was finished with Linda K's training, I was at the next level.
It's Linda K. But when you trust that piece of you that says, I got something to give, I have something to say, you know you've got something to do.
Get on your feet, shake your hands in the air. Welcome to the stage, Linda K.
And we're back. And I did say we have a really, really special guest today. You know, I think that when we have a little bit of coaching and I'm thinking about some of the people, I was just coaching with somebody that everybody may know, certainly in the record books, who was legendary, Marion Jones. And she had coaches, and her coach was on that same session. And I think about all the things that we can do in our own lives. We don't just do it by chance. We don't do it because we were just so motivated and driven to do it. We do it a little bit better because we'll reach a little bit further when we have a coach. So today, please welcome to the stage my good friend and guest, Sandra Possing. Hey, Sandra.
Hello, Linda. Thank you so much for having me. Stoked to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you here. And, you know, we're talking about coaching from whether we work out as a coach. I know my coach will say, "Here, just give me one more rep," and I'm like, my muscles are burning and they're sore and they're tired. And he goes, "Just give me," and then drops another 10-pound weight that I've got to push out with my feet. Or why is it that we can do more when we have a coach?
Oh man, I think there's so many things that are at play when we're working with someone, even just having, like, in the context you're talking about in a gym. You know, I'm a fitness freak, my husband and I too, and we have a lot of our social life is kind of through the different gyms we're a part of. And I see it all the time, you know, somebody who maybe has all of the desire in the world, but if they're trying to do something at home, whether it's do a home workout or just get something done at home, versus if you're doing it with, it's like there's something about being witnessed by another person. And it's one thing to have a coach or a trainer or a mentor of some kind, but even just a friend or an accountability buddy who can, like, hold you to your own integrity of the commitment that you've said that you're going to do, whatever the thing is. So I think there's just a huge power in being witnessed. And then also the power of someone outside of yourself who can see your blind spots, who can call out, you know, like I always, when I think of sports coaches, I always think of, I'm in the Bay Area, so I think the Warriors, and I think of Steph Curry. I'm by no means a sports expert at all, but I think of Steph Curry, and it's like, even some of the most amazing athletes in the world, they have people on the outside who can see things that they can't see when they're in it. And I think, yeah, whatever the coaching or mentorship context is, there's just so much power in that.
You know, I think you just said something that kind of triggered me, which was, you know, we have this certain, you know, let's call it a rep that we do, whether it's 20 minutes on a phone call of making reach outs, or it's, you know, I'm going to spend this 1 hour to digitize something and learn something, or I start my morning out with, you know, these kinds of things. We know where we can go with, you know, a lap around the pool or a lap around the track, or, you know, that we do things in a certain pattern. But there's this issue about consistency, which is the human condition, and then not seeing the gaps between the reps. Can you speak to us about that?
Yeah, there's that power of somebody outside of you seeing something that you don't. What was coming to mind as you were saying that too is, I think part of the power in coaching is having somebody whose belief you can borrow. I know
That's so good.
so many of the clients I work with, you know, it's like, I kind of joke that one of my superpowers, which is like a blessing and a curse. Like when I speak to a new client or a potential client, it's like I'm looking at them, and then I'm also at the same time seeing their potential. It's like I see their future self seated right next to them in a way, which is amazing because I can see, I believe in their possibilities that they don't believe in yet. So it's a beautiful thing. They sign on with me and they can kind of borrow my belief until their own self-belief catches up to it. But it's also, like, jokingly, I say it's a little bit of a curse because not everyone's ready to change. A lot of people are getting ready to be ready, and we can't force it.
And why is change so hard?
I think change is hard because we're wired to stick with what's familiar. If we go way back to our ancestors, we're wired to stick with, like, it's change is scary, change equals death.
Right, don't go out of the cave because
out of the cave, yeah. And as much as we say we want something, to go get that thing and close that gap, it usually requires getting out of our comfort zone, which is like getting out of our familiar zone, I think is an even better term for it. And it just, it's scary. All the fear naturally comes up, but it's also, if we learn to navigate the fear, and I think of fear as like it's this monster in the corner. And the more that we just look away from it and pretend it's not there, the more it's just going to be there and it's going to grow in size, or the more we kind of cower from it and let it control us, the more it's going to grow in size too. But if we actually dare to look the monster in the eyes and even turn to it and be like, let's dance, and like see it just as a relationship.
Right. Who's leading this dance, right? Is it fear, or are we leading the dance?
Exactly. And I think it gets to be this co-creative process where we lean into, and, we get support from mentors or peers, or we grow our courage muscle just little by little, one rep at a time. And we don't have to go, running out of the cave at full speed the first time, because then we might go so far out of our comfort zone, we're in like our panic zone, and then we go back to the cave and never leave again. But I think we can take a little, depending on who we are. Some of us are maybe bolder or more sensitive than others, but we go at a pace that's right for us, and we kind of tiptoe out of the cave and try it. And we're like, okay, calm my nervous system, recognize that I did something that was scary and I survived and I'm okay. And tomorrow I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to take like 2 more steps outside, and then we can slowly condition ourselves to recognize that, hey, like, this is a good thing.
Your clients aren't coming to you because they want to take one more step. Your clients are coming to you because they want to take that one step, that 5 steps faster, because they're not getting it. They don't have the muscle memory to be able to do that, or they don't have the stamina, or, in many, many cases, the capacity, right? Because today it's so much more demanding. As an entrepreneur, we have to be aware of so many things, and we've got, at the same time, we have to be able to motivate other people, to inspire other people to do things that they may not want to do, may not even know how to do. And we need to know where that is. And so, and now we've got to take on more skills. We need to have, of course, AI and a lot of the tools that make it a lot easier for us to be more visible. But we're having to learn, and there's more than a bigger demand for us getting attention in an attention deficit society. So how do you coach your clients to find that balance, to find that place where you get them to take a step faster and further, and still find, and is there a balance, or should we just give up on this notion that there is no balance?
I think balance is kind of what we make of it. I think I do believe it's possible to have everything and do everything, just not always at the same time. And so I think we have seasons, right? And then we may have seasons where we're leaning really hard into business and working harder, and then we're leaning back from, say, social or some other things. And then we have seasons where we pull back a little bit from work. So I think balance is a very personal choice. And I think we get to kind of I think of it more as a prioritization dance, where I'm looking at, okay, I have all these different areas of my life that I could put attention and effort and intention into, but which ones are most important for me right now in this season? And can I prioritize those and let the other ones kind of be on maintenance mode for a while? And then I shift gears. And I think for deciding where to put with something like entrepreneurship, where there's a million different strategies you can do, and there is all these shiny balls and you want to go in all these different directions. Some of the ways that I think it can be helpful to come back home to ourselves is to always be prioritizing authenticity and integrity. And like with marketing strategies, for example, they all work. They can work for different people, but which ones actually feel right to you? which ones feel in integrity, which ones are, interesting enough that they're sustainable, that we're going to continue with them and be consistent. And I think that's like, I look at my clients with any of them trying to take action towards any of their goals. It's like, what's the kind of action that you can take on a regular enough basis that you're going to get results that you're willing to stick with? And some of it is like really boring, tiny baby steps, but the goal on the other side of it is so worth it. So it's worth it to take those boring steps. But like somebody who's trying to do a marketing strategy that they hate, I would hate to see someone spend a bunch of time on something they hate
to execute on, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think there's so much room for us to really be honest with ourselves about what lights us up. What do we actually like? What are we passionate about? What fits in with, my kind of true essence, and what is it aligned with my beliefs?
We're going to get into that in a second, but in 2021, Yahoo featured you as one of the top 10 life coaches. And I want to talk to that for a moment. When people reach out and they start thinking about a life coach, they feel that there's something lacking in their life, or they feel that there's something that they want to reach that they don't know how to get to. Why are people coming to you? What is it that they're drawn to? What in your program and your personality, what are they coming to you for?
Yeah, so I get a lot of folks who you could say that they have spent most of their adult life following the roadmap that they were given, kind of like the traditional or conventional success roadmap. They're doing everything that they were conditioned or taught to think that you're supposed to do to be successful and be an adult and, go to a good school and get a good job and do all these things. And then oftentimes they get to a point where they are relatively successful, but then they kind of hit this wall and they're like, I'm successful.
Next.
Why am I not happy?
Right.
And they start to worry, and they're like, I look at what I have in my life. I should be grateful. And then they start to worry that there's something wrong with them. And they start kind of freaking out about that. And so what I love to work with them on is helping them kind of come back home to themselves and recognize that there's nothing broken or wrong about them. There's usually just like a disconnect. There's a misalignment because they've been doing and being what they thought they were supposed to do and who they thought they were supposed to be. And sometimes you get lucky and that's a great match. But for a lot of us, that's not authentic and it's not really in integrity with who we really are. And for so many folks, they never even gave themselves a chance to figure out who they are or figure out what they actually want. They were just busy ticking the boxes.
Oh,
and so I love
that, so a parent or, a career path, maybe an advisor told them, if you get this degree, this is your career path. And they find that, in 10 years of working in that same career path, and maybe even 5, they don't want the same thing anymore. I know that happened to me. I knew that I was told as a music major, you should go in this direction. But when I went in that direction, it was like, I can't make the kind of money that I want to. And I looked to another direction. Sometimes we don't, maybe we need that permission. Do we need the permission, or are we just looking for somebody to validate that?
I think we all crave validation and permission, and depending on kind of what we grew up with and what we surround ourselves with, sometimes we need to give ourselves the permission because we're not going to get it from somewhere else. But I think for a lot of folks, just having like a neutral third party, someone like a coach, I jokingly give my clients like permission slips, or I'm like, I hereby grant you permission, because it's like they're so used to thinking in one very kind of limited way of thinking, which is whatever was modeled for them growing up or whatever their friends are doing and their peers. And so having someone who kind of be like, hey, you're allowed to consider other options. It doesn't mean you have to quit your job and, move to the beach and drink coconut water all day. It's like, there's so many other options that I think a lot of us we haven't paused to consider that there's a different way of doing things. And sometimes it's just tiny little tweaks.
That idea of sitting on the beach with some coconut water is starting to sound pretty good. So what changed between 21 and 23 when Apple News named you now the top 10 industry leaders? What changed between 21, 23? Do you change up as your clients get better?
Ooh, I think that we are all always evolving. And certainly my goal as a human and my goal as an entrepreneur is to always evolve. And I don't think that I spend much time with people who are not open to growth and evolution, given the industry that I'm in. Certainly all my clients come to me because they're ready for a change and they're ready to grow. And I very much choose to spend my time with people in my friend group and peer group who are hungry for growth, because I kind of feel like that's the whole point. And I think that's something I see actually that a lot of my clients struggle with, which I always hope to open their eyes to is, there's this fear of like, there's a fear of commitment because they think once they choose something, they're going to be stuck with it forever. Or there's a fear of doing anything because there's this fear of like, once you pick something, you can't choose. And I'm of the belief, one of my mentors says, you are allowed to change your mind about anyone or anything at any time. And I so believe that. Not only do we get to choose and change our mind, but that's kind of the whole point. Like, let's evolve, let's pivot. And I think as entrepreneurs too, we get really scared of pivoting. But I like when I'm in somebody's audience and I'm looking up to a role model or an entrepreneur that I admire, I love it when they pivot. It doesn't confuse me. I'm just like, good for you. Let your business evolve as you evolve. And so that's always my goal for myself and my people, is to allow us to evolve and to fuel that growth.
You said something earlier about authenticity, and I really want to understand. We don't step into something not feeling authentic, but we're often told if we don't know how to do something, fake it till you make it, right? You just step into it, or in your expression, they borrow my confidence. Where does that transition occur, and is that okay? And how does that fit into authenticity?
I think so to me, what you're talking about is identity, which is one of my favorite topics in the world. It's kind of the core of everything I do. And I think of our identity as three parts: past, present, and future. If our past is everything up until now, so it's our conditioning, our trauma, our childhood, all of that, that is where I think most people get stuck, is that their present self is just their past patterns repeating on autopilot. And therefore, a lot of people just keep repeating the same patterns and the same reality over and over and get stuck and get really frustrated. To me, identity work is so exciting because you acknowledge all the past parts of yourself. And then in the present, you're actively deciding which of those past parts do I want to keep. Some parts I love. Other parts are not helpful. They were protector parts from my childhood that were keeping me safe, and they're no longer serving me. So I can start to like gently release and surrender those parts. And then who I am now, I try to always be looking at like, how do we kind of unpeel the layers of the onion and get down to like, what is actually really true for me? What is my true essence, my authenticity? When I'm at my most kind of relaxed, calm, confident, happy, in my power self, when I'm not trying to fit in or trying to be who I think I need to be, to me, that's my authentic self. And my goal is always to strive for that and to have my people strive for that too. And then the exciting part with identity work is when we start to think about future self, like who do I actually want to be? To me, authenticity is, yes, who I am underneath it all. And what am I striving? Like, who am I aspiring to become? So it's like the next level of me, which is still authentic. It's just it's like an up-leveled version. So my future self is me. She's very authentic, but she is a little bit more successful. She's a little more confident. She's a little bit more bold. She's a little bit more all the things I aspire to. And then in order to close that gap, you mentioned fake it till you make it. I think there's some merit to that, but I prefer the phrase embody it until you become it so much, because it's not about pretending to be something you're not. It's about stepping into something that you want to become.
And I think that's really hard for people because they don't have a point of reference for it, right? So we have a point of reference for how we grew up because it's very easy to look into the past. It's hard to see our future self because we don't know how we're going to fit into it. We don't know what it's going to feel like. And there are also people that are around us that want to keep us from going up to that level, because if we step up to that next level, what happens to them?
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. And I think a lot of folks are going to, if we're growing and evolving in some way, and then people look at you and they're like, ooh, you changed, I don't like that. It's often coming from a place of it's making them uncomfortable. So then they're going to project their own limitations and judgments onto you, which I think is part of why it's so helpful to surround ourselves with people who are growth oriented or who are willing to support you and be like, I don't know, I don't understand what journey you're on, but good for you. I'm cheering you on. I'll be here to support you, even though I'm on a different trajectory, which I think is fine too.
Yeah, and that speaks well. But again, maybe a client has married into at that level, and how do you help that person sort of realize to they don't have to leave them behind. That their demonstration of whether it's a fitness or a weight program or anything. And the minute we tell somebody else this, you could do this with me, and you probably they're out. They're not in your camp anymore, right? How do you talk to your clients so that they get them to come along with them?
Yeah, I try to encourage people to stay in their own lane. If I'm working with a client whose partner is on a very different path, and the client is working on themselves and doing inner work and getting fit and trying to change their life, and their partner is very stuck where they're at and resisting it and judging it and stuff, I'm like, you're probably not going to be able to convince your partner that you're right and they're wrong and they need to get on board. So the best thing to do is just kind of like let them, like, not my circus, not my monkeys, let them be on their own thing, kind of love them from afar, but then stay in your lane, focus on your goals. And then so much of the time, when somebody's really focused on their own goals, they're unintentionally even just modeling that behavior. And then their partner starts to be like, wait a minute, what are you doing? It seems to be working. And then they get curious, and then they can come on board on their own volition instead of being talked into it, which is usually going to have the opposite effect.
Correct. And no fun, because, nobody's going to do something being shamed into it for very long, right?
No, shaming, not sustainable and not pleasant.
Not at all.
No.
So let me ask you something. I mean, you spent some time as an outdoor fitness coach. How do you bring that discipline of fitness into your coaching practice?
Man, I love fitness so much for all the health and wellness benefits, obviously, but to me, it really has become a lifestyle, and it to me, it's like also one of the best metaphors for life. And that's probably the way that I bring it into my work with my clients is I'll use it as a metaphor. And just, when we're talking about something like, so a lot of my female clients especially really struggle with setting boundaries and assertive communication and standing up for themselves. And even
that's
just like
a tough one, isn't it?
Even just knowing what their boundaries are. But so when we're having them practice figuring out boundaries, setting boundaries, reiterating boundaries, that's when I'll bring in analogies about going to the gym, doing, you just got to show up to the gym, put your reps in. You're not going to go from lifting 1 pound to deadlifting 500 pounds the next day. So you have to slowly work up. And it's the exact same thing with boundaries. It's the same thing with even just figuring out what you want and taking action, having the courage to get out of your comfort zone. It's like we practice taking a lot of baby steps.
So walk me through like a simple conversation of somebody setting a boundary. They don't know how to set boundaries with other people, the loved ones that they have in their life, they've never said no to. And how important, first of all, is a boundary setting?
I think it's absolutely crucial. And I say that mostly from my own experience of someone who really struggled with setting boundaries, because even though I intellectually understood the importance of a boundary and how helpful it would be to set one, by voicing a boundary, I always felt like I was being mean, or I was going to, as a people pleaser too, I was always worried about disappointing the other person or bothering them or putting them out in some way. And I had to realize over time, and then through helping so many of my clients with it too, that setting boundaries is actually one of the most generous things you can do. Brene Brown says the most generous people in the world are the most boundaried people in the world. And I totally agree, because if you flip it and you think about the fact that if I have no boundaries and I'm just giving, and every time somebody asks something from me, I just give, and I bend over backwards, then I start to be very depleted. And when I'm depleted, what's going to happen? I'm tired. I'm mentally tired. I'm emotionally tired. And I start to be resentful. So the very people that I'm trying to like please and give to and caretake, I run out of generosity and I'm coming from an empty tank and I feel resentful. And then the people who are taking from me, probably unbeknownst to them, because if we don't have any boundaries, it's like we haven't given the people in our lives a rule book or a guidebook about how we want to be supported. So somebody might be violating your boundaries because they don't know what your boundaries are. And the problem there is like we expect people to be mind readers, and no one is. So when you set a boundary, it's a respectful, beautiful gift to them, because it's like you're handing them a little guide that's like, here's how to support me.
That's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But if somebody is very used to a particular dynamic in a relationship, and I'm just going to call it a dynamic because dynamics change, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to be necessarily 100%, I don't know, enthusiastic. Oh, she just set a boundary for me. That hurt, right? Because the first thing that a taker or somebody that doesn't understand boundaries is going to resist you, right? Yeah. And so when you're coaching your clients, what are some of the things that you say to them that help them remember? Do you use mantras? Do you use, affirmations? What kind of things do you do to help them remember who they are?
One thing when it comes to boundaries that I like to remind them of is that the people who will be the most upset and disturbed when you set a boundary is the people who've been benefiting the most from you not having a boundary. So when they see it that way, they can recognize that, like, okay, this person is just they were able to, walk all over me, and suddenly they can't walk all over me. So they're annoyed because now they don't get what they used to get. But then it's like, if somebody really cares about you or is willing to be open to you, stepping into your power and being more assertive, they will eventually learn to respect and honor your boundaries. Some people, it may take a little training. So I think we can give them some patience. But at the end of the day, it's like, it's so much about taking care of ourselves. We can't show up as our best self as partners, friends, parents, employees, employers, whatever roles we have, if we are unboundaries. Because if we're unboundaried, we're bound to be depleted and resentful. And when we don't know what our own limitations are, like if we don't know what we're available for and not available for it, then we're kind of available for anything and everything. And then we turn into these like wet noodles that, not only are we intentionally bending over backwards, but we're like being walked all over, and we lose who we are.
So let's take that a different direction now. Are we really working at our best, or is there more that we can do? Is there more that we can get, that we are more than who we think we are?
I think we get to decide what we want to be in any moment. Like, as much as I'm a personal development junkie and I love always working on myself and encouraging others to work on themselves, I also want to always acknowledge that we're human. And, just like with anything else, personal development can become an addiction too. We can get to a point where we're using it as a crutch, and it's always more and more and more, and I'm never enough. And I think the most maybe balanced and helpful approach is a little bit of both. And it's like, yes, I'm always working on myself, and I'm going to also pause and be present, and I'm going to appreciate where I am, and I'm going to accept that I'm a flawed and imperfect human, and I'm going to accept that I'm worthy as I am. Like, I can be completely and totally worthy as I am, period, end of story, and choose to work on myself because I want to. It's not about working on ourselves because we're broken or we're not good enough. It's both. We're good enough, and we can work on ourselves, and we can give ourselves breaks.
Thank you for that. And that's a really important message. I was watching a track meet recently, and there was a young runner that hadn't really run and put the time in as the other runners had. And he slowed down around the turn. And I want to use that as a business metaphor. Sometimes when we don't really know what's around that corner, we don't know how to take that corner, whether we're driving the car or we're driving our career, we tend to slow down around those things. What do you say to encourage your clients to how to take that turn?
I know with a lot of my clients, and I see it just so much in my peers too, and in myself, this desire to, we have a need for certainty as humans, and we want to, because basically everything is uncertain. We can't really predict or control everything. So we try to predict and control everything. And one of the things that I find makes my clients gives them the most anxiety, the most overwhelmed, it's like when we start our work together, they're kind of like balled up and tense and rigid. And so much of that comes from, I believe, like this desire to predict and control everything. They're scared to take action. They're scared to move forward because they need to know what's going to happen. But of course, you can't know what's going to happen. So I think the more that we can regulate our nervous systems, and I'm like doing this because so much of it is about relaxing our body and having our body feel safe and learning how to calm our nervous system, and then get to a place where we can trust that we'll figure it out. Like, I'm sprinting on the straightaway. I'm coming up around a turn. I don't know I've never done this turn before. I don't know what it looks like. I might skid out. I might fall on my face. I might run into someone. I might run off the
track.
and I can't predict it. So the best thing I can do is train myself to trust myself that when I get there, I will figure it out. And that, to me, that's what confidence is. I think a lot of people conflate, or they mix up confidence with like being really skilled at something. And of course, when we're really skilled at something, we feel good at it. And so that helps us feel confident. But to me, confidence is more about being able to walk into any room and trust yourself to figure it out.
Yes, and yes. So what is what would you say the biggest issue is that your clients are coming to you? is everybody is different. Everybody's got a different skill set, but you offer things, you teach things in a certain way, whether it's in group or one-on-one. And so group has to have collective consciousness. What are the issues that they're coming to you for?
I see it mostly as two different categories, and then within those two categories, there's a lot of subcategories. So the
Sure.
first big bucket is it's their relationship with themselves, and then the second big bucket is essentially their relationship with their life. So I think of it as like healing your relationship with yourself and then creating an extraordinary life that you love. You can definitely work on both of them at the same time. I typically lean more into working on the healing your relationship with yourself part first because it informs the lifestyle design so much more. If we kind of know, the more we know who we are, the easier it is to figure out what we want. Whereas a lot of people they go straight to just trying to work on the goal. But the problem is a lot of the goals they're working on are not their actual desires. It's what they think they should be working on. And that's why I love the healing your relationship with yourself part, which so much of that is just actually knowing ourselves. I think a lot of us, we've created these identities for ourselves based on our past, based on conditioning, based on societal expectations. And so because we don't know who we actually are, we're just like on autopilot. We're looking around at what everybody else is doing. We're copying them. We're doing what we think is going to make it people impressed or make us be accepted and loved. And so most of my clients come to me and it's like they're uncomfortable in their own skin because they haven't relaxed into and accepted and owned who they really are because they don't know who they are, so much of that is like coming back home to themselves, and that's an ongoing, hopefully lifelong process. But I love just getting them kind of rebalanced into the basics and the foundation of who they are. And then from that place, they feel more comfortable in their own skin and they feel more confident. And then they start confidently walking toward whatever their goals are, which we've been figuring out like in this lifestyle design arena of just, what do I actually want? Which sometimes, looks like people quitting jobs and starting businesses, or getting a divorce, or moving to a different country, or like doing some big scary thing. Most of the time, though, it's like a series of tiny little tweaks. I have a lot of people who come to me, they think they need to change job or change their careers, or it's like a career thing. And it turns out their career was actually fine. They were just so bored and stuck because they're doing the same damn thing over and over every day. So then we start like reintroducing them to hobbies and passions and little things that light them up. So it's like suddenly there's this sense of aliveness in their day-to-day again, and they realize their career is fine. So a lot of it is just like redesigning, retweaking, and making little shifts in their day-to-day reality. So their day-to-day reality is much more pleasant. And then they can also get really clear on what are the bigger and the more long-term goals and dreams that get them lit up and excited, so they have something to work toward that's really meaningful. But a lot of it comes down to finding that fulfillment, which I believe it's hard to find fulfillment without that sense of self, of identity, of like, who am I really? What do I stand for? What are my values? Like, to me, what is life about? And then I'm going to go create a life intentionally that is about those things versus just living on autopilot like most of us do.
And speaking of autopilot, don't we do a lot of our decision processing by autopilot, right? This is how I've always done it. Why should I make any change? Or you get that, I like to think of it as the grain of sand, the tiny grain of sand under the contact lens. It's slightly irritating, but I'm not quite uncomfortable enough to make that change. How do you find them in that process of, that matrix of, I'm ready for a change. I know there's something wrong. There's the sense of being aware of something and the pain of the fear of making a change, and then the actual need to make that change. Excuse me while I let the dog out.
Yeah.
Answer that though, please.
I think, decision making is such an interesting thing. And again, I think the tendency is to do decision making by default. And I think the default looks like, for a lot of people, it's looking around. I think most of us live from the outside in versus the inside out. And when we live from the outside in, we look outside of ourselves for answers. So it's like, what's my neighbor doing? Or like, what is everybody else my age doing? Like, what's normal to do?
What is somebody going to think of me if I do this, right?
Yeah, exactly. So much is the perception, or how will people perceive me? What will they think of me? I don't want to be judged. So we make decisions based on what's going to make us look good or what's everyone else doing. And it's like, again, we don't give ourselves permission to actually think like, what do I actually want? So that's a big part. Like for my clients, to get them to a better place of decision making, we try to get them really clear on what are their core values, for example, because then it's like they have this foundation of, this is what I believe. This is what I stand for. This is my belief system about the world. And once they know their core values, decision making becomes so much easier. And then also beyond that, it's kind of like boundaries. It's a series of putting the reps in and practicing, like letting themselves have a preference. And so when they're making decisions in favor of their values, their goals, their desires, their dreams, their passions, not based on what's everybody else doing and what's going to make me look good.
So talk to me about core values for a second. You know, kids, we grow up seeing them demonstrated by those that we're raised by, whether it's a parent or a sibling or a grandparent or an extended family for that matter. Do you carry those same values into your life, or do we get to change them? Like, you know, we change our appearance from time to time, where, you know, I've shed 10 pounds or I put on 15 over here. Are those core values that, for me, I understand my core values. I understand my limitations, but I understand my core values. When you're coaching your clients in those core values, what do you observe that they have observed? And are they comfortable changing those pieces out in their core values?
Well, good to go back to what I said before. I think that we're always allowed to change our mind about anything, including our core values. I think that as we evolve, certain expressions of ourselves will evolve. I find that with most of my clients, I usually have people do a set of 10 core values just so they have like something to kind of walk away with. I found that a lot of those do tend to remain pretty steady throughout their life. In the beginning, though, they'll often come up with some values that are mostly based on their conditioning. So they'll end up with values that maybe look sort of similar to what they grew up with or their family values. But as they dig a little bit deeper, and I have a whole process I take people through that's pretty fun and creative, and it kind of forces them to not just go with traditional things like what their family would say, but it forces them to look at things that are almost a little bit more symbolic, a little bit more metaphorical. Like one of my personal core values that I always give as an example to my clients is mermaids, which like, nobody has to know what that means, but I know what it means. You know, to me, it's about like the divine feminine and play and also cold water and like adventure and freedom and stuff like that. I had a client one time who she texted me all excited. She was working on her core values and she was like, Sandra, one of my core values is AC/DC. And I was like, I love that for you. I can guess what that means, but I love that for you. You know, so we try to make it really personal. And in that process, they start to kind of connect with this part of themselves that's like, this isn't just some boring exercise like you would do maybe at a company event where they're like, this is our company core values and stuff, where it's like, it doesn't feel personal. But when you're doing it for yourself, you start to find these things that, like, if I were to look at, somebody else's core values, I can be like, I love that for them, but it doesn't resonate for me. If I look at my own values, I feel it in my body. Like I can feel the resonance. It's kind of like there's a little tingle, and I look at the list and I'm like, yes, this is who I am.
Yes,
and that's what I want them to feel.
It's funny, and thank you for saying the word association with the core value, because it's the representation of what that is for you, right? So mermaids, I thought mermaids, and I'm thinking, but wait, what? They're in yes, but there was a sense of they're in cold water, they're in fresh water, they're always doing something new. And they are feminine, right? So that word really embodies that. And when you said AC/DC, I'm thinking that sounds pretty wired and pretty crazy and way out there. And maybe that's what their personality is. And that them listening to that music finds that peace for us. To our listeners, what would you say to them if they were in search of their core values? Shine us into that moment, would you please?
Yeah. So I'll give you one of the tips. So when I have my clients I have a whole 4-step process I take them through, but one of the parts of the process that usually ends up being most people's favorite is I have them think through the question, what pisses you off? Like what really, really pisses you off the most? Because that's usually an indication that underneath the thing that pisses you off, there's a core value of yours that's being stepped on or that's being violated. So for example, one of mine is when I see one person disrespecting another person, it's almost less about when I get disrespected, because I've curated my life to be such that I very rarely encounter that. But when I see it happening between other people, or even like if I see somebody drop a piece of trash intentionally on the ground, to me, that is like, this human is disrespecting Mother Earth. And that pisses me off so much. So to me, if I dig a little bit deeper there, I can see that, okay, I have a value of respect that's being violated. Or I look at, because one of my huge values is authenticity, not surprisingly, given this conversation. when I see that, let's say someone is not allowed to, or it's not safe for them to be their most authentic self because of their culture, because of their religion or something like that, or the community they live in, that pisses me off, because it's so important to me that everyone be allowed to be who they are and be supported in that. So fun and kind of like snarky, interesting way to figure out your core values is just start by looking at
That's a trick I just love. Sandra, that's so awesome. And, you just said something that kind of triggered me as I think about, our busy lives as parents raising a child. When you have, as an entrepreneur, I had people in the house frequently, and I had a nanny with us until my daughter was 11 years old. And they're not raised with the same values. And so we're doing a value transference. And then I will see kids at a playground and playing, and they're being told not to do what they are being, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that you should allow your tyke to poke somebody else's eye out or something like that. But, they're crying or they feel sensitive towards something, or just be strong. That's what I heard as a kid often was, just be strong, stop crying, and big girls don't cry. And so you can be raised with this false sense of what your values are, and yet your authentic person in there is that soft little marshmallow cushy person that's learned how to have that crusty exterior. So is that the kind of thing that you're talking about when you say authenticity and values?
I mean, to me, for each of us, our authenticity is unique to us, and our values is like part of, I would say it's one piece of what makes up the totality or the identity of who we are. To me, identity is made up, it's who I believe myself to be, and values is a piece of that. And I think we, again, as we grow and evolve, we get to kind of reevaluate and check in and reflect, are these things still important to me? Or there's a lot of things that, maybe used to be important to me, and I'm like, meh, not as important anymore. And I've reprioritized, I've reshuffled my values, I've added things, I've let things go. But to your point of like on the playground, you show up with your values and somebody else shows up with their values, or your authenticity, their authenticity. And that's like, the playground is like a micro version of what happens in the world on a macro level. Whereas like somebody believes that their way is right, and they're going to bump into somebody who believes that their way is right. And then we have a conflict. So I think so much yes to owning our own authenticity and owning who we are and all of that. And we exist in a world where we have to coexist with other humans. So that's where we, open the whole other can of worms of communication and respect and relationships and interacting with people who, even if we're so completely different than, how do we do this balance or have this like beautiful balancing act between being true to who we are, but also respecting who other people are, and that oftentimes it's very different than us.
I would say it's those boundaries that we set, Sandra. So I think it definitely is. I can't believe we're almost out of time. Is there something that you want to say to our audience, or how do they reach you? How do they get in touch with you? They want to find out more about how they can get in touch with their core values so that they can be a better person, so they can be and live a better life, more productive life.
Absolutely. So I'm very easy to find. I'm the only one of me. So if you can go to my website, sandrapossing.com, or you can just literally type my name into Google, Sandra Possing, and I'll show up. I'm at Sandra Possing in all the social medias. And then my little free gift that I would love to share is makingyouMagnetic.com, which is just a 3-episode mini pop-up podcast series, really easy to, I'm a podcast junkie. I pretty much only listen to content these days. I listen while I'm driving and walking and doing dishes and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
This is an easy to access little free gift, and it's all about making you magnetic. Magnetism is another one of my favorite topics.
So let's repeat that just one more time. Making that free gifts. Karen, can you put that up on the screen for us?
Yep, makingyouMagnetic.com.
makingyouMagnetic.com. That is so good. Sandra, thank you so much for being my guest and for being your authentic self and being who you are to enlighten our world and to help people live a better life. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a blast.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us again. I really hope that you will resonate with many of the things that were said today. Share this with your friends. And if you want to know when these shows come on or be notified, then like this and subscribe. Thank you again, and we'll see you next week.
Do you like to talk about money? If you do, and you'd like to be a guest, contact me at lindak360.com.